Good morning. Today we are going to continue our beginning of Sub-Saharan Africa, and after our initial introduction, today we're going to get a little deeper into this fascinating continent. And here again we're going to focus on the area below the Saharan Desert, hence the name Sub-Saharan for the region. So let's go ahead and continue to discuss the early African genesis of humanity. So we know that the earliest bones that have been found in South Africa, and also very ancient bones of early humans originating 7 million or more years ago from Africa, and the trace from Australopithecus on through to Homo and Homo sapiens. The actual beginning of civilization is traced back. The earliest states were developed in West Africa, in what is known today as Mali and Mauritania, the state of Ghana. And in this early state, it's important to really know that the African tribal civilizations, the tribes, the peoples, many different tribes, many different dialects, and even today there are many different dialects and tribal peoples all over Africa, but that the orientation of society and culture and the the building of culture occurred in the interior, not on the coast at this time. So Ghana was a center of activity, very colorful, very exciting, and trade began as other places were developed in the transition from Ghana, really went from west to east. And so the state of Ghana was developed, and then Timbuktu is a real place. It's right here, and it's located in Mali on the Niger River. So Timbuktu, what we know from fairy tales as being a very magical kind of a place, really existed and was a center of high civilization. And trade began as civilizations developed and moved towards the east. There was trade routes established along this corridor and on into what is now known as the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East, and these civilizations started to develop and flourish. And again, this was a very central interior of Africa orientation of peoples and of development of society and culture and trade. And so there was also the Bantu migration begun about 5,000 years ago. It was very important too. So the Bantu peoples originating from this area, moving eastward and southward, and so Bantu peoples have traveled and located to these areas. And that is another very important event in African history. So these societies and cultures and states were developing in the interior. So Ghana, and then here, what is now known as Sudan and Eritrea and Ethiopia, Kush, Axum, and Ankara these states developed. And again, this is all interior, not coastal. And so when Europeans in the 1500s started to travel in ships, 1500s, 1600s, and then the colonial period began, this changed Africa forever, and in ways that have been very challenging and very, very detrimental and dangerous at times. The slave trade, the horrors of the slave trade. This is when, now slavery has been something that has existed for a very long time. It did exist in Africa before European colonial period began. However, it became commercialized. It became a world commercial trade, trading in humans. That's when it became horrific and very widespread. And that's when the numbers of people that were transported, and so many died in transport. So the area that really, where most now, there were peoples taken, abducted, and sold, and shipped from all over Africa, but it was mostly West Africa. These states here and here. And what began to happen with this transformation, it was a total transformation, land and people, culturally also, of Africa when the colonial period entered. What began to happen is an orientation from the interior societies towards the coast. So there was a depleting of peoples and society and culture and just strength, vitality, as the peoples were abducted from these areas and as trade was established with Africans too. This is Europeans and Africans, but these states that are along the coast here began to become more and more important and integral in trade, and this is what began to be the focus rather than agriculture and trade as was in the past, and more focused on the interior. It became focused, and the savanna areas were where agriculture and trade were happening here. And then this shift to the coast, and then the colonial importance placed on the coastal peoples and the trade occurring with coastal peoples.